Hey, welcome back to Spellbound. It's me, BEEJ, and this is another hyper-specific book recommendations video. These are across all different types of genres, and these are all different types of books and different types of stories, but they all take place in a forest. So let's get started. The first one is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Faeries. I'm quite sure that you have already heard about this book. It's not that it's polarizing necessarily, but I have met a lot of people who really enjoyed it, and a lot of people who were like, it's just not for me. But for people who have said it's not for me, it's because this is more cozy fantasy. I'm really giving cozy fantasy a go personally, and I'm discovering that I just don't think that it's for me, but I have almost zero criticisms about this book. This book is delightful. It is cozy, it's charming, the characters are wonderful, they are compelling, they're interesting to read about, they all have really good banter. The story itself was interesting. I enjoyed it in that regard. It's really just the genre, and for everyone else that I've met, when we talk about Emily Wilde, most of their criticisms are about the cozy fantasy genre, not about this book in particular. So this book takes place in winter time in the secluded forest, wilderness, etc. of a fictionalized but Norwegian adjacent country. It takes place in wintertime, so they are in a cozy cabin for a lot of it, which has really delightful vibes. And it's about Emily Wilde, and she's trying to find basically this door to the fairy world. And she, through her research and through the research of other fairy explorers, essentially, and fairy folklorists, they have narrowed it down to this location and this real world town, that in the woods somewhere there is the location, the door to fairy. And she has a colleague who ends up crashing her expedition somewhat, and he has his own reasons for wanting to find the door. So they are at times working together and at times a little bit working against each other, but they have delightful chemistry, delightful banter, and it has all of those cozy winter forest, cozy cabin vibes to it. Like I said, it is cozy fantasy, so you have to like cozy fantasy to like this one. I feel like that's necessary. So that's Emily Wilde, and this is like a wintertime forest. This is A Game of Fox and Squirrels by Jen Reese, and it's a middle grade, and this forest is the woods in Oregon. And it's the woods behind a farmhouse. So this one follows our main character, I've already forgotten her name, Samantha Littlefield, and she and her sister are sent to this farmhouse in Oregon to live with an aunt that neither one of them knew existed, following an incident, and we aren't really clear on what that incident is at this time. But they're sent to live with this aunt, and her aunt gives her a game, and it's a little card game called A Game of Fox and Squirrels, in which you have to work, you're a little squirrel, and you have to prepare for the season that's coming up, but you have to look out for the fox. And you never really know what mood the fox is going to be in, and depending what season the fox is in, he's going to be in a different kind of mood. And maybe he is just going to be like a clever trickster, maybe he's going to be completely harmless, but maybe he'll actually go after you instead of your acorns. So she enjoys this game, and then one night she meets Fox. The fox from the game shows up behind her house and starts talking to her, and he has not a proposition for her, but he has an opportunity for an adventure. He tells her the stakes, and if she can get him sort of these scavenger hunt style items, then he will help her get home. Since he is the fox from the game, she's not sure if she can trust him, but she really wants to get home. So this is about her adventure, sort of collecting these items for this fox. She also ends up meeting the squirrels from the game in the woods behind the house, and it is an excellent story. I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. It is an incredible story in itself. So just taking it at face value, I'm hesitant to say delightful because there are stakes in this book. It's not just like cozy and charming. It is those things, but there's also some meat here. 5 out of 5, I would say, just for the surface value story. But 5 out of 5 for the subtext as well. There's a lot going on in this story, and it is delivered in a way that is not, it's not heavy-handed, but it's also not cerebral. You know what it is that we're talking about. You know what it is that we're talking around. And it's a way to talk about the consequences of trauma without trauma dumping in a book. So I really appreciated that. There's no on-the-page violence. There's no on-the-page trauma, but there is a lot of discussion around, and through storytelling, there's discussion and depiction around what it looks like when kids are processing trauma, and how over time dealing in an environment that is potentially abusive can lead to a state of hypervigilance, and what that actually looks like and how that plays out in the book. I think it's incredibly well written. I cannot recommend this book enough. It was really good, and I really enjoyed reading it as well. So high enjoyability, high degree of writing. It was well written. It was a good book, and also there was lots of woodsy exploration, which also just feels like a Canon Kid event. You know, like when you're sent. For me, it was like in the summers, spending some summers with my cousins and exploring and playing in the woods by the creek and like that kind of stuff. It has like major playing outside energy. And that was nostalgic in a way and fun to read about, but also 5 out of 5 for story. So the next one I don't have a hard copy of because I have already unhauled it, but hear me out. After the Forest by Kel Woods. I'm still going to have like my picture up like usual, right? So After the Forest by Kel Woods is marketed as, and the back of the book will tell you that it's not exactly retelling of Hansel and Gretel, but it does follow Greta about 10-ish years after the events of Hansel and Gretel. So after the gingerbread house, after she saves her brother, that kind of stuff. And it's following Greta, and her brother has some gambling debts, and she's having to figure out how to save, once again, her and her brother. And it might involve, you know, using some of the witchcraft and secret recipes and the like from the spell book that she stole from the witch's cottage back in the day. Now, I'm immediately hooked, compelled. I love a fairy tale retelling. I love a moody forest, because that's the other thing. The atmosphere of this book, 10 out of 10. It just, I don't think was marketed well, because there's a lot more going on than just Greta in this story. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to back up and talk about the atmosphere. I thought this was a spring, summertime, forest, woodsy type of story, but it's actually not. This is a very autumnal, spooky, misty forest kind of fairy tale forest. So already so much better than even what I thought it would be. But I would have wanted to even know that going in to get excited about it. It was an interesting discovery because it felt a little like a shift. So this is not so much a one fairy tale retelling. This is also about a sort of fairy tale village place. And there's other fairy tale stories being woven in the background of this. So that's another thing that I wish that the book had mentioned going in, is that this isn't just following Greta and Greta's struggles with her dumb brother. Like this, there's actually more going on to this story, and the story's so much bigger than we thought, okay? I think it would have been in the book's best interest to say that, because I think that's far more interesting. So you have multiple fairy tale crossovers, fairy tale retelling crossovers. You have a spooky forest in the autumn, and you have real historical context. So this book is not about a fictional village and a fictional place and a fictional time. That's all made up, and it's just like this fairy tale place. This book takes place during the 30 Years' War, in a real place in history, during a real time in history, and there is real historical context. And that specifically is why this book didn't hit for me and why I unhauled it. I love books and fairy tale retellings specifically that are set in a historical time and place. I love it. I love Dark and Deepest Red by Anna Marie McLemore. That's the 12 Dancing Princesses. It's also about the persecution of the Romani people. I love The Deathless Girls by Karen Millwood Hargrave. That is similarly about the persecution of the Romani people, but is a retelling of the Brides of Dracula. These are incredibly rich fairy tale retellings that have incredibly rich historical context. But the historical context acts as a way to ground the fairy tale and add incredible amounts of subtext and depth to the story. I didn't feel that the historical context in After the Forest added depth and subtext. I think it just weighed the book down. And here's why. The plot, though, and the story of After the Forest is still very fantastical. It's not so much this rich, character-driven story, it's a fantasy. And so you're kind of along for the ride for this fantasy. So the rich historical context is not so much providing rich storytelling. It's acting more of a plot device of why our main character can't have agency. And I didn't love that, because if you're asking me to believe that if, Hans from Hansel and Gretel is this drunk guy and he has gambling debts and he's gambling in a den with Rumpelstiltskin and, pick a guy from fairy tale, why in the same universe can Greta not have agency over her own decisions as well? And so that's how the historical context is acting. It's acting more just like a ball and chain to our main protagonist, our main female character. And ultimately, it just prevented our female main character from being the driver of the story. And instead, the story happened to her because it's a fairy tale, because that's how fairy tales happen. So in that way, I didn't love that balance. However, all of that being said, my issues with this book, I think that there's a lot of people who would enjoy it, and they would enjoy it for a lot of the reasons why I didn't. I think they would like that it's more of a fantasy and much less of social commentary. I feel that other people might think that it is a richer fantasy because it does have historical context and wouldn't want that historical context to get in the way of a good story. And that's a totally valid take, and I think a lot of people might have that take. So I do recommend this book. I really do. I don't think that the book is wrong. I think that there's just something I'm looking for in a fairy tale retelling, especially a fairy tale retelling that chooses to have historical and cultural context, that I didn't like how this book did it. But that's an absolute opinion of mine and not a criticism necessarily inherent of the book. So I do recommend it. And most of all, and most relevant to this video, is the atmosphere of this book was fantastic. A spooky, misty, autumnal fairy tale forest, 10 out of 10. Like, for that alone, I'd recommend giving it a shot. Next is Freewater by Amina Luqman-Dawson, and this is set in the swampy woodlands of the Deep South. This book follows, what's his name, Homer, I believe? Yeah, Homer is a young boy, and he is enslaved on a plantation in the Deep South. One day he and his sister run away, and they run away through the swamp and end up finding and discovering an entire community of formerly enslaved folks who have made Freewater, which is their own little home and oasis in the middle of this incredibly uninhabitable swampy area of the South. And this is based on it's not like based on a true story, but it's based on the true history of these like swampish communities of people who found a way to live and thrive in these completely uninhabitable areas of the Deep South. And it's actually based on a specific swamp. Like, she did her research, the author did her research on, they were called maroon communities, first of all, not swampish communities. They were maroon communities. And it's inspired by the Great Dismal Swamp, which covered 1,500 square miles from Virginia to North Carolina. True to its name, the swamp was an inhospitable and almost impassable tangle of vegetable and marsh, yet people escaping enslavement found ways to survive within it. So this book is about Homer, and he finds a new life for himself on this maroon community, but he also feels really bad because his mom wasn't able to make it out with him, and so he devises a plan to go back to the plantation and rescue his mom. So this is an incredible story about, it really focuses on bravery. That was really neat to read about, the different ways that bravery can show up in middle grade age kids. But more than this being an incredibly well-written book, an incredibly important book, this book is actually very fun to read. I shouldn't say actually, but it's so heavy as a context and as a premise. This is a very heavy premise, but the entire plot of the book is not traumatic, and it doesn't focus on the trauma of the plantation. This book was similar to reading like Robinson Crusoe or different like Robert Louis Stevenson type of exploration-y books. There was a lot of middle grade exploring the wilderness in this book. It was very adventure-y feeling. And I don't say that to say like that there weren't any stakes and sometimes I forgot what I was reading. That's not what I mean. I mean, there was a very high enjoyability factor to this book that I found specifically to be within the setting of this book. It made reading about this inhospitable swamp an incredibly rich place to have an adventure. Knowing that the adventure itself is not frivolous, it is very important. But it was awesome to read about this kid discovering it for the first time and discovering a whole community who have made treehouse style like ropes and ladders between these trees to travel the terrain. I mean, just reading about that was so neat and fun, and it was so rich of a setting. And so it's not exactly woods, but it is technically, but it's swampy woods. And so for that alone, I would just recommend picking this book up. It was an incredible adventure with incredible stakes, and I loved this book so much. So highly recommend. 5 out of 5, 100%, like 5 stars across the board for character, story, setting, subtext, everything. And the last book I also don't have physically because I unhauled it, but I really, really enjoyed it and I really, really recommend it. It's just that it was cozy. Okay, it's just that it was cozy. So I still recommend it. And it is Shady Hollow, a mystery, a cozy mystery about woodland creatures, and it was exactly as delightful as it sounds, like honestly. So this story, it follows a reporter who writes for the paper, and one day she discovers that this mean grumpy old toad who lives at the edge of the swamp is dead, and he has a knife in his back. And so there are like basically never murders in Shady Hollow because it's such a delightful little community. Like who would kill someone? So she gets on the case because the detective, he's not a very good detective. He's like a bear, I believe, and he's just not a good cop. His sergeant, like the sheriff, is always away on a fishing trip. So he doesn't really know what he's supposed to be doing on how to solve this mystery. So she takes up the mantle and she's like, you know what, if y'all aren't gonna solve this murder, I'm gonna. And so she does, and she has her best friend who is a raven, I believe, and works at a bookstore. There's all these other characters. He's like the tycoon of the town, and he owns the watermill, right? There's also the owner of the paper. Somebody did it, right? And then there's that hussy, I think she's a sheep, right? And she's just getting with all these guys in town, and she has a reason for keeping this story quiet. You know, was she involved with the toad? Was she involved with the one who killed the toad? There's just a lot going on in this little woodland town, and it was so adorable. It really was. It was a cozy mystery, so if you enjoy cozy mysteries, I can't imagine it gets cozier for even the cozy mystery genre than to have a cozy mystery about woodland creatures. So it was adorable, and obviously it was most adorable because of the charming little setting. You're in Shady Hollow, which is just this little woodland town, and there's like the local hangout is this cafe who's run by a moose, and it's just freaking adorable. And I recommend it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, I believe. So I thought it was cute. It's just not for me, which is why I just didn't keep it. But I enjoyed reading it. It's just, cozy. It's just not my vibe. Someone did die technically in the book, so that was a point in its favor. But you know me, I like my violence. So anyways, I do recommend that book tremendously, and I recommend it for cozy readers and for just woodland fans. So those have been 5 books that all have different woodsy, foresty, swampy settings that I enjoyed reading about. You may not read in themes like I do, in setting themes, which is kind of hyper-specific, but do you have a recommendation of a book that takes place in the forest or in the woods or in a swamp? Because I would love to know of it. for my next time that I just decide to get on a kick where I just only want to read books set in the forest. Otherwise, what have you been reading this summer? You know, like, what are you up to? Let me know down below. And as always, take care, drink water, fight fascism, and happy reading.